There's a chance that I'm going to get abducted today.
What's the first thing you think about when I say aliens? Roswell? Area 51? Agents Mulder and Scully? E.T.? Alf? Or big budget Hollywood sci-fi?
You're one ugly motherfucker.
Maybe even your partner, but probably not the Scottish countryside. But here we are, taking a walk on West Lothian's very own UFO trail, which I thought would be a gentle stroll out with Frida, but it turns out this beautiful forest is a real life nightmare full of dark secrets. Not just UFOs, but sadistic murder and sad tales of suicide. Join me as I explore Dechmont Law.
So what did happen in 1979 in the sleepy woods of Dechmont Law?
But just occasionally there is physical evidence to back up reports of close encounters. On the morning of November the 9th, 1979, forestry worker Bob Taylor walked down this woodland track outside Livingston New Town near Edinburgh. He rounded a corner and was astonished to be confronted by an unearthly object.
It's a huge thing with a big round dome and very dark grey colour, and it had a big flange.
Later he described what he'd seen to a local newspaper artist who drew this sketch.
As I stood here, there was two balls came out, two balls. I think they'd be about 3 feet in diameter with about 6 spikes. And they were rolling on these spikes. They came right up beside me, and I remember feeling a tug at that time. And a very powerful smell, a choking sort of smell. And that was it.
This is the site referred to in Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, which describes an encounter between a forestry worker out walking and what appeared to him as an unidentified flying object.
It's just not every day you can say you're at a UFO crash site. A UFO landed here. Can't get my head around that. Whether it happened or not, somebody believes a UFO landed here, and we can't prove it either way. So you've got to have an open mind, right? The universe is just expanding all the time. It's vast, vast, vast. Unlimited stars and planets and galaxies and black holes and all sorts of manner of things that we can't explain. I mean, I've got to worry right now. I'm hearing a plane overhead, but what's the chances it's a UFO coming? I mean, you got to think, if aliens landed once, could they land again? Would they land on video now and give me the biggest global Netflix? This ain't Netflix, Martin. Give you the, I'll never get a Netflix deal. Give you the biggest YouTube audience following ever. So what do you think? Do you believe in supernatural? Do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in goblins, wizards? Do you believe in UFOs? I've got an open mind personally.
He crawled up this path and staggered home to be met on the doorstep by his bewildered wife.
It looked terrible when he came in the door, and he just stood at the door, and I said, "Have you had an accident with your lorry?" And he said, "No, I've been attacked." And I said, "What with?" And he said, "A spaceship." And I said, "Oh, goodness me, there's no such a thing as a spaceship."
Just disembarked. The police were called and they discovered inexplicable track marks at the scene of the incident.
Approximately 40 holes in the ground. And these are the track marks here, and these are the 40 holes. This is the photograph of the hole here. This is the holes that measured approximately 3.5 inches. And this other photograph here, you can actually see the tread marks which correspond to the marks here. These markings and tracks were actually inside this area here that's fenced off. Definitely no other tracks leading to or from this area.
Well, I'm pretty certain that day that I saw a spaceship sitting here.
We must accept this story of Mr. Taylor. He is a very highly respected member of the community, a man of high integrity, and not one likely to invent such a story.
For me, it was bold of the police to say they support Robert Taylor's story. On one hand, you could say it's because the police thought that Robert Taylor was an upstanding citizen and truly believed what he said. Or, on the other hand, you could say it was a get-out-free card. Don't have to do any investigatory work into this ridiculous story. Let's write it off as a UFO. So I'll be honest, I expected just a normal run-of-the-mill woods, but it has a bit of a feel to it. It actually does feel a bit creepy, as if something has happened here. So we've just spotted something weird in the woods. No doubt it's nothing, but we're going to go check it out all the same. Oh, just got a leg. Tell you what, I nearly got one of Robert Taylor's leg rips there. And it was just a tree. There is something strange though. I don't know how to get round. Well, strange thing, looks like it's just an old tent. And I'm guessing there's no dead bodies in it because Frida's not having a good sniff. So we'll call that a win.
It wasn't until I returned home and continued my research into Dechmont Law that this seemingly innocent scene quickly became stomach-turning when I learnt of a secondary disturbing incident which occurred in these very same woods, far more devastating and as a parent inconceivable. In 2005, the lifeless body of an innocent 11-year-old boy was found in an upside-down two-man tent, I guess much like this one. Rory Blackhall's murdered body was sadly discovered by mountain rescue dogs and park rangers following a report that the young boy had gone missing, leaving the local community devastated. The vile character, who was deemed the key suspect, hanged himself before going to trial for another case where he repulsively preyed on young girls. Unfortunately, whilst that trial unfolded, he would have the chance to strike one last time. Shocked as I read the chilling story, the hairs stood up in my arms, thinking about what could have been if I had uncovered that same tent 19 years earlier, finding the unfortunate little boy who never had the opportunity to live his life. Rest in peace.
So far we've just been scoping out the area to see what the lay of the land is and visit the UFO site before we do more research and come back tomorrow. Now the UFO site is really dark. We're just about to walk through the woodlands, which to be fair was pretty dark before. So I can't help wonder why I'm walking about the woods in the dark, in the fog, when there's might be UFOs kicking about. It's funny, it's it's cold, but I'm walking and you do feel particular cold spots. That's certainly something I've noticed. It's very scary here. So I don't think I caught it on camera, but I did just see something rather strange in the woodies. Peter! Peter! Peter gone missing, give me the creeps. She's an explorer though, I can't judge her for it. But when I was looking for Frida there, I seen something white in the bushes. And
Oh, Dinah. It's just a rabbit with a waistcoat and a watch.
Oh, my hearing biscuits! I'm late!
I guess it's the reminder for gents to speak to each other.
Incredibly, the fate of Anton Tom was of yet another individual to die in these woods and haunt the community with trauma and mourning. His sad story is acknowledged in the media due to his family wishing to raise awareness of suicide, especially in young men. Without warning, Anton, a seemingly regular boy, showed no signs of unhappiness, yet would leave his family a heartbreaking note expressing significant depression and anxiety before hanging himself in these woods, and the bench serves as a reminder that it's okay to not be okay.
So we're nearly back at the car for exploration day 1. We were just scoping out the UFO site.
As I arrive back at the car, I admit to a sense of relief to get out of that dark woodland. It left an evocative sense of fear, even before I learnt of the deaths that occurred. Yet, I knew I wasn't done with Robert Taylor's account from 1979, and had a strong desire to return tomorrow and investigate more, to explore the truth.
Morning, good morning, rise and shine. Today's the day I make you mine. The sun is rising over the hay. I know it's gonna be one of the days.
So let's put on our detective's hat and go through every plausible and cockamamie explanation, Netflix crime documentary style. Let's not hold back.
I've even brought the bullshit detector. Frida will sniff it out.
So one option has to be that Taylor was simply telling the truth. Now the thing is, Taylor's story, for me, wasn't the usual little green Martians. So does that make it more or less plausible? The life is out there theory.
Then what can I say?
You might very well be sceptical. I know I am.
There's no such a thing as a spaceship.
If Taylor's own wife went straight to sceptical, I think it's only fair that us as strangers to Taylor have a sceptical stance as well.
But one option has to be that Taylor is unquestionably, unconditionally, factually correct. There's an infinite universe, huge galaxies, countless planets, stars. There has to be other life out there. And beyond the Earth, somewhere, why couldn't they have more sophisticated technology than humans have to travel further into the stars? And they're observing us, visiting us, and on some occasions maybe even interacting with us. Some of us have seen it, some of us have not. And some of us have maybe seen stuff that we think we've seen. I mean, have you ever been walking home at night and thought, what's that in the sky? Of course you have. Most people have. Does that mean you necessarily think it's aliens and UFO? Not necessarily. Does it mean it wasn't UFOs? Not necessarily.
What evidence was there to support Taylor's claims?
So we have circumstantial and physical evidence to support that Taylor's story was true. The eyewitness testimony of Taylor himself, an apparent reliable source.
Very highly respected member of the community.
Well, he wasn't a man that made things up. He was a very quiet man.
Just so unlike my dad to talk about spaceships or anything like that.
Odd and unexplainable marks on the ground at the UFO site. Taylor's torn trousers that were ripped up, not down.
These are actually the trousers that Robert Taylor wore on that eventful day. This is a very heavy ripped tear. The forensic report clearly states this was not made by any forest debris, sharp stones, sticks, barbed wire fencing.
Nobody, including the CID, could explain how those rips occurred.
These rips in these trousers were made by some device that attached itself to Robert Taylor's trousers, pulling them very, very forcibly upwards.
And one Google search will reveal hundreds of accounts in the UK alone, millions worldwide. So, Taylor's telling the truth. End of the story, end of video. Not quite.
The post-war trauma theory.
Robert Taylor was a war veteran, serving in the Second World War. Can you imagine what that trauma was like? Most of the modern Western world could never comprehend what war actually means. Being in a war, being around gun shells, and blows my mind. I don't even know how to describe war. I've not been in war. I hope I'm never in war. I hate watching war on the news. I mean, can you comprehend it? I just could never comprehend being in a war. So you can imagine how fragile you would be, how traumatic you would be after war. So the strain on Taylor's mental health finally couldn't handle it anymore, and he had a breakdown disguised by the story of an alien abduction. Isn't it strange that the aliens were described as landmines? Isn't it weird that the tracks were extremely similar to tank tracks? Isn't it strange that he's had a life that could have left trauma? So this theory is very plausible, but you just couldn't prove it. A medical assessment could only go so far. But counter-argument to that, no documented evidence actually exists of Robert Taylor struggling with mental health problems. Now you could argue that a UFO sighting is a mental health problem. There is an argument in there, of course there is. But can you really return from an event such as the Second World War and not have trauma?
So we're stood just 30 seconds away from the UFO site, and behind me is Bangor Village Hospital. Now that was a place for the clinically insane. Is there a connection between Bangor and the UFO? The science-fictionalisation of trauma theory.
It applies to an event that you absolutely do not want to remember. You create a fictional story to bury your trauma so deep you have an altered reality in essence, which erases and replaces the facts in your mind. So hear me out. Isn't it odd that alien abduction stories go hand in hand with probing of human bodies? Taylor was covered in mud, his legs didn't work, his trousers were ripped, he was flustered and confused. A horrific 20 minutes Taylor wanted to forget. Let's not beat about the bush. This was the 70s, when men were men. What if the truth was so grim and accurate recollection was never an option for Robert Taylor? One thing I did notice, as Taylor recounted his story, often his eyes looked rather dead, as if the story was killing him inside. What if Taylor was violated in the woodlands? So one of the UK's largest mental institutions is just a stone throw from the UFO site, full of disturbed people, capable of all sorts, unimaginable things. So according to Taylor's own story, he says that he was unconscious. If you were unconscious, would you have a recollection of time? However, if you were conscious and getting assaulted, abused or probed, I think you would have a recollection of time. Whether it was accurate or not is another question. I do hate this theory, but it peels the onion layers, giving reason for mental disturbance, a reason to fabricate an elaborate story and mask the truth while supporting a lurid assault that a man in the 1970s just would never admit to. Perhaps I've seen far too many Netflix crime documentaries, but thinking outside the box, I just can't help but think of the worst.
The hallucination theory.
I think this next one is a very simple theory, but one that has to be explored.
A year before this encounter, Bob Taylor had suffered a series of inexplicable headaches for which he'd gone to his doctor and received treatment, and they'd never got to the bottom of what was causing it.
There's a theory suggested that Robert Taylor ingested some wild berries in the forest. Now, these berries have the name of Atropa belladonna. They're very, very dangerous because if you ingest these berries, you can die. If you rub the berry fruit on your hand or your wrist, you can suffer hallucinations.
He was a gardener and a forester all his life, so he knew not to eat anything poisonous. He would never have eaten anything like that.
So whilst under the influence of magic mushrooms or plants that cause deliriant behaviour, it caused confusion, clouded consciousness, it could explain Taylor's missing 20 minutes, it could explain why the wild story to Taylor was very vivid and real. But there is a drawback of this theory, and that is that the doctor examination never touched upon this fact.
That morning I was doing the house calls for that part of Livingston, and we received a call at the surgery from his wife saying that this patient had been attacked by a flying saucer, and could we make a house call? Well, he was rather agitated and distressed, but he was able to give me quite a reasonable story about what had happened. I did a complete routine examination of the vital signs, heart and blood pressure, temperature, and lungs and abdomen, and there was no basic physical abnormality to be found.
But perhaps medical technology in the late 70s wasn't quite as advanced as it is today, so maybe we wouldn't detect it, or perhaps enough time had lapsed and the effects had already worn off. So I think it's a valid theory, but from the interviews of Taylor's that I've seen, I just don't see him as the type of man to take drugs, especially hallucinogenics.
The driving under the influence theory. So Taylor, according to Taylor, had a mishap in his own vehicle. So another option is Taylor was just simply drunk.
I had a Bedford van and I got into the van and I couldn't drive it. I reversed it right into a ditch.
And rather than admit his embarrassing mistake, alcohol made him concoct a ridiculous story. Now, I've no evidence, of course, to support this. His wife was sceptical, but never mentioned alcohol.
No basic physical abnormality to be found.
But it is reported that he crashed his truck. It could be a simple but elaborate cover-up. Additionally, maybe that car crash caused some fumes, explaining both the burning smell experienced by Taylor and it caused hallucinations. Plausible? Maybe. Provable? No.
Good girl.
The crime syndicate theory. So another option is Taylor was attacked, just not by aliens, but instead by citizens of planet Earth.
Just found it very, very hard to believe that this UFO had landed in Dechmont Law that morning. He took the approach that Mr. Taylor had been assaulted, and therefore we would carry out an investigation into his claim of being assaulted.
Now, there is a notion about expensive lead pipes and stolen materials being kept near the alleged UFO site. Now, this isn't too surprising given that a lot of development was happening in the Livingston new town.
A community spirit had grown and Livingston's face changed.
So a lot of materials would have been available and opportune criminals would be all around that. So if the stolen materials were at some point moved, it would explain why there was markings left on the ground.
I wasn't sure what to make of them, but I did recognise some of the marks as those made by grass when it grows around objects lying in the grass. As an architect, I'd seen this very many times. In fact, most people will have seen it. If you leave a plank or something in grass, the grass will grow around it. If you remove it, you've left a pattern, a mould of this shape in the grass. This looked to me like that, and I was a bit sceptical that any craft had landed in this clearing. I was able later to conclude that these looked like the marks you get when the pick is heaved into the ground to get the planks and wood out that have been trapped there, lying there for some time. So there was a reasonable mechanical building construction explanation for these marks, which I was sure had nothing to do with whatever Robert Taylor had seen.
The diameter of these holes in the ground were approximately 3 inches. They would have to be really, really big picks.
Well, I certainly can't recall pipes being stored here. I couldn't categorically say they weren't stored here, but I've no recollection of that. Smaller marks and quite precise marks and not consistent with pipes have been laid in the ground.
I examined the site here. The vegetation was green, and I believe that if pipes had been lying on the ground for any length of time, it would have turned the vegetation into a yellow colour.
So if Taylor stumbled across the stolen artefacts, maybe he was threatened, maybe even assaulted. Certainly it would explain why Taylor had some marks on him, but it would also explain why there was indentations on the ground. Now, why didn't Taylor just go to the police? Perhaps Taylor was too scared to tell the truth for the fear of repercussions and devised a story to safeguard his family. So there is hearsay to back this one up. I think this is a plausible explanation. The hidden tank theory. So sticking with the veteran angle, Taylor's an ex-tank driver. Maybe he misses the feel of being a tank driver, and maybe Taylor went out of his way to get a tank. Or a side angle of this one, maybe criminals dealing in illegal war paraphernalia stole a tank. Either way, if you needed someone to drive a tank and somewhere to stash it, cue a tank driver who is also a forestry worker with access to 76 acres of land. Robert Taylor, he's your man. It's 40 years on, where did the tank go? I need far more evidence to support this one. It's hard to make this story solid.
Definitely no other tracks leading to or from this area.
But there's definitely something in it. A tank driver, tank marks on the ground. Come on. There's definitely enough tanks in civilian possession to make this plausible. The epilepsy theory. So there's a number of theories I've read out there surrounding real-life medical conditions. Epilepsy is one of them. Having a mini-stroke is another example.
Predisposed to have a fit, and if he'd had not had meningitis, this wouldn't have happened to him.
9 years previously, there would have been surely to have been attacks of trouble in the 9 years between the original meningitis and this event which occurred.
The medical person I consulted, my medical colleague, was quite satisfied that the whole experience was explained as an epileptic fit.
Had you ever had a fit before?
Never. No.
Have you had a fit since?
Not at all.
Perhaps what Taylor described to him is real, an honest account, an honest man with a corrupted memory. But all of the visuals that Taylor experienced were the result of normal responses to a medical condition causing circuitry problems to the brain. It seems so plausible and so simple, but can we perhaps debunk this quickly? Medical examinations state Taylor's vital statistics were good and he was in full working order. But it wouldn't be the first medical exam to miss something. So my last theory is probably my favourite theory.
The hoax theory. So on the face of it, Robert Taylor is someone you think you could trust. But what is it they say? It's always the ones you least expect. Now, I've watched enough Netflix crime documentaries. I mean, Ted Bundy being a prime example. Is it true? Can't trust the quiet ones? Maybe, just maybe, there's more to this than meets the eye.
A cheeky wee story to leak to the press. It couldn't be too difficult to imprint marks in the ground, especially with access to forestry equipment and
You're a
vehicles.
crazy bastard.
There's nothing overly elaborate about the evidence that can't be rationally explained with logical options, beyond Taylor's own account that is. It is odd that a former tank driver and vet sees two things. One is marks on the ground that look remarkably like tank treads, and two is UFOs that look incredibly like landmines. It just seems like it's things that would have been in Robert's mind. Yeah, Taylor's described as a quiet man, but he was more than open to do interviews and appear on television. It's not far-fetched that he would have just enjoyed a good joke like most people. Even willing to be open to ridicule with a bizarre story. I do like to think that Robert Taylor took the ultimate joke to his grave. I personally think that's the most enjoyable of all the theories. That's the one I would like to believe in. It's certainly something I would like to leave beyond the grave.
In the end, we'll never really know. In 2007, Robert Taylor sadly passed away at the age of 88. So maybe we should just end with a bit of good faith and give Robert Taylor the benefit of the doubt.
I don't really know. It's a thing that happened. It was very mysterious.